He is an all-star. He's an incredible leader. You know, he's become a guy who's been a force, and he's brought a consistency to the game every time he steps on the court. And he has elevated that team. It's fun to watch, and we feel that there's incredible momentum now with the Pistons, an incredible amount of excitement. I think it's onward and upward for the Detroit Pistons and Cade Cunningham. Looking at
April 29th, 2026. The Pistons were down 3-1 to the 8th-seeded Orlando Magic. Their best player, the guy who carried them to the number 1 seed in the East, had suffered a collapsed lung in mid-March and barely made it back for the playoffs. And Detroit hadn't won a playoff series in 18 years.
Cunningham, the crossover. Cunningham, the finish.
Then Cade Cunningham went out and dropped 45 points. He broke a Pistons playoff scoring record that had stood since 1968. Detroit won Game 5, won Game 6, and then closed Orlando out by 22 in Game 7 to complete the 3-1 comeback. Look, you don't need me to tell you Cade is the real deal. You've watched the whole arc already. The 30-win turnaround, the All-Star appearances, the All-NBA conversations, the 60-win Pistons. You already know why the comparisons make sense. But what most people don't know is exactly when those Grant Hill comparisons actually started and who started them. They didn't begin in 2025. They didn't begin when Cade made his first All-Star team. They started back in October 2021. Grant Hill sat down with and Cape that month. Cade hadn't played a single NBA game yet. The reporter asked Hill about the comparisons people were already making between him and the new Pistons rookie. And what Hill said in that interview should have stopped the entire NBA world in its tracks. Most people in 2021 brushed it off as polite Hall of Famer talk. They didn't dig deeper. They didn't read past the headline. Then Cade dealt with Rookie of the Year snubs, shin injuries, and eventually became the face of a 28-game losing streak. That quote got buried. The Hill comparison became a punchline. But this is a story of how Grant Hill saw all of this years before it happened, where he saw it from, and why the version of Cade we're watching in this playoff run is the exact version he described before almost anybody else understood it. To understand why Hill saw it, you have to understand where he was watching from. Most people assumed Hill was being polite because Cade was a Piston, but Hill had information most scouts didn't have. He'd been gathering it for years. Grant Hill has lived in Florida for a long time. He settled in Orlando when he played for the Magic and stayed there. Cade Cunningham played his final 2 years of high school at Montverde Academy. And where is Montverde? About 30 minutes from Orlando. So while national scouts were breaking down AAU film, Grant Hill was driving over to Montverde and watching Cade play in person. He told Escape he had been watching Cade as far back as Cade's junior year of high school when he was only 16 years old. That matters. Hill wasn't reacting to draft buzz. He wasn't politely talking up the new Pistons rookie because somebody from the organization asked him to. He had been watching this kid for years. So when Detroit drafted Cade in 2021, Hill was one of the few Hall of Famers who could actually look you in the eye and say, I know exactly what you're getting. Here's what Hill said in that 2021 interview when he was asked about Cade. He said Cade wasn't a traditional point guard, but he could play the point. He could score. He said he had a maturity about him that was probably further along than Hill's own emotional maturity at that age. He talked about tremendous leadership qualities and the versatility in his game. Think about that for a second. Grant Hill came into the league out of Duke at 22 years old. 2 national championships. One of the most poised players in college basketball. He was already an adult when most rookies were still kids. And he was sitting there in 2021 saying that Cade, at 19 years old, before his rookie season even began, already looked more emotionally advanced than he was. Then the reporter followed up, and this is the part Pistons fans should have memorized. Hill said, he sees the complete game. Some people have a house and it's only one window in that house. He's got a house with plenty of windows. That's the line. A house with plenty of windows. Most players see one window. Maybe 2. They see scoring. Or they see playmaking. Or they see defense. Cade sees the whole house. Every angle. Every read. Every layer of what's happening on the floor. That was Grant Hill's evaluation of a 19-year-old who had not played a single real NBA minute. And what Hill described in 2021 is exactly the player showing up right now in the Eastern Conference semifinals. He reads the floor. He stays calm under pressure. He impacts both ends of the game. In Game 2 against Cleveland, Cade had only 5 points at halftime. Most stars start forcing shots in that situation. Most stars speed up. Cade didn't. He kept running the offense. He stayed patient. And by the final buzzer, he had 25 points and 10 assists. That's the player Hill was talking about. Cade had a strong rookie season. He averaged 17, 5, and 5, and finished third in Rookie of the Year voting behind Scotty Barnes and Evan Mobley. That alone wasn't enough to kill the Hill prophecy. But the next year is where things got complicated. In the 2022-23 season, Cade played 12 games. Stress fracture in his left shin. Season over. The disabled player exception followed. Then came the questions. The Cade is fragile conversation started. The what if he's the next Penny Hardaway comparison started floating around. The Hill comparison technically stayed alive on Pistons Twitter, but now it had flipped. People weren't using Grant Hill as a ceiling anymore. They were using him as a cautionary tale. Then came 2023-24, and that was rock bottom. Detroit finished 14-68. They lost 28 straight games, the longest single-season losing streak in NBA history. Tied for the all-time mark the 76ers had set across 2 separate seasons. Cade was the face of it, and he was living every single loss. In January 2024, he went on the WOJ pod and said, "This has been one of the most humbling experiences of my life." He admitted he had thought he was good enough that something like this couldn't happen to him. He admitted he had to learn that scoring wasn't enough. He said he had to figure out how to make the game easier for the players around him. That was one of the most honest interviews a young NBA star has given in years. And you know what the response was online? People called him soft. People called him a bust. Yardbarker ran a headline calling Cade's championship talk absurd. That was a real sports media headline in December 2023. Read it now, and it sounds ridiculous. But that was the temperature around him. And this is where it gets interesting. Through the Rookie of the Year snub, through the lost season, through the shin injury, through the 28-game losing streak, through the bust discourse. Grant Hill never changed what he saw. Not once. He went on the Whistle Sports show in February 2025, and right at the start of the interview, he went back to when Cade was 16 years old. He said, even at that age, you could see something special about Cade as a person.
I saw Cade Cunningham in high school at 16, 17 years of age. Even then, just a tremendous amount of maturity. You know, he would come over, he would speak, he'd look you in your eye. You just knew there was something special about him as a person and his character. And you fast forward, you know, the number 1 pick, I think he had some injuries. The team, I think, was struggling a bit. I even think last year, as hard as that was for him and for that franchise, it really kind of gave them some toughness. And Cade now has emerged. Like, he is an all-star. He's an incredible leader. You know, he's become a guy who's been a force, and he's brought a consistency to the game.
The same belief, the same read, and the same conviction never changed. That is what separates Grant Hill from almost everyone else who got Cade Cunningham right. It was never simply that Hill predicted Cade would become a good NBA player. Plenty of people said that. Former coach Dwayne Casey said at Media Day in 2021 that Cade would not be a bust. Mike Boynton called him a winner at Oklahoma State. Jason Kidd said in 2022 that he should have won Rookie of the Year. But Hill was different because he never backed off, never adjusted the language, never softened the take during the hardest stretch of Cade's career. Through the shin injury, through the losing streak, through the noise that called him overrated, fragile, or a future what-if, Hill kept repeating the same thing. The kid he watched at 16 years old was still the player Detroit Pistons would build around for the next decade. That mattered because the years between promise and proof were brutal. In the summer of 2025, Detroit finally returned to the playoffs for the first time since 2019. They lost to the New York Knicks in 6 games. But even in defeat, there were signs. Cade finished 7th in MVP voting. The numbers were there. The control was there. The franchise finally looked like it had direction again. That summer at a golf event in Lake Tahoe, Hill sat down with RG and picked up the story exactly where he had left it. He called Detroit's season magical. He talked about resilience. He talked about how the previous year's pain gave the team grit and resolve. He said they reflected the spirit of Detroit itself, fighting, collaborating, figuring it out together, surviving hard seasons instead of being defined by them. He was not talking like someone surprised by the rise. He was talking like someone watching the next chapter of something he had already seen coming. That is why this current playoff run feels like the moment the prophecy finally closes. There are 2 reasons. First, every single trait Hill identified back in 2021 is now showing up in real playoff moments. The maturity, the leadership, the versatility, the complete game understanding. Second, and maybe more important, Cade is now doing things in a Detroit uniform that Hill himself never got the chance to do. Take the first-round series against the Orlando Magic. Detroit went down 3-1. Their season was on the brink. Cade was only weeks removed from a collapsed lung suffered in mid-March. In Game 4, he gave them 25 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 blocks, but the Pistons still lost. Most young stars in that spot start pressing. Some force bad shots. Some disappear emotionally. Cade did the opposite. 48 hours later, in an elimination game, he delivered the defining performance of his career, 45 points, 14 for 14 from the line, a franchise playoff scoring record that had stood since 1968. Detroit won Game 5. Then they won Game 6. Then they returned home and finished the job in Game 7 with a 22-point blowout. That was not just talent. That was command. They'll said Cade had leadership. The proof showed up after that series. When the media asked about the comeback, Cade did not make it about himself. He specifically pointed to veteran Tobias Harris and praised his professionalism throughout the series. He talked about the team reconnecting with the habits that made them the #1 seed. He framed the comeback as collective discipline rather than individual heroics. That is leadership in its purest form. When pressure hit, the locker room stayed together because its best player kept it together. Hill also said Cade saw the complete game. That has been just as visible. Against the Cleveland Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference semifinals, Cade had only 5 points at halftime of Game 2. That is the kind of moment where stars often chase the box score. Cade did not. His face barely changed. He kept organizing the offense, kept manipulating pace, kept getting to the line, and kept making the right read. By the end of the night, he had 25 points and 10 assists. He did not force the game to become his. He simply controlled it until it bent in Detroit's direction. Right before last year's playoffs, Hill explained this part of Cade better than almost anyone. He said the similarities were about controlling the game and impacting it in different ways. He talked about Cade's feel, his instincts, the way he thinks the game at a high level. That is exactly what is happening right now. He reads the floor early. He understands where help is coming from. He knows when to speed up and when to slow down. He knows when to attack and when to let the defense reveal itself. Those are not just star traits. Those are franchise traits. And this is where the story gets heavier, because the part that will age best from this run is not a stat. It is history. Hill never won a playoff series with the Pistons. 6 seasons in Detroit, 4 playoff appearances, 4 first-round exits in 1996, 1997, 1999, and 2000. That was not because he failed as a player. Hill was a 7-time All-Star, 5-time All-NBA selection, the 3rd overall pick, and a co-rookie of the year. He was one of the defining talents of his era. But the breakthrough never came. The way it ended still hurts to think about. In April 2000, 1 week before the playoffs, Hill sprained his left ankle in a regular season game against the Philadelphia 76ers. Detroit's medical staff told him the MRI showed a bone bruise. It was not a bone bruise. It was broken. Hill played through it anyway. He made it through Game 2 of the first round against the Miami Heat. But by halftime, he could not continue. He walked off. Miami completed the sweep. Hill never played for Detroit again. The ankle never fully recovered, and the injuries changed the course of what should have been his prime. In later interviews, he admitted he still regrets how it ended. Now jump forward to May 3rd, 2026. In Game 7 against Orlando, Cade put up 32 points and 12 assists. Detroit won 116-94. The 18-year drought was over. The Pistons had won their first playoff series since 2008. And in that moment, Cade accomplished something Hill never got to do in a Detroit jersey. That is why this run feels bigger than simple player development. It feels like a bridge between eras. And now, at the time of this conversation, Detroit is up 2-0 on Cleveland in the Eastern Conference semifinals. They are 2 wins away from the Eastern Conference Finals. That is the part Hill saw in October 2021. Not only the player, the era. When he told Cape that Cade had maturity beyond his own at the same age, he was not just offering a flattering comparison. He was passing the torch in real time. For years, the Hill comparison got treated like a lazy basketball shorthand. Tall Detroit star, plays like a guard, sees the floor, high IQ. People stopped there, but Hill himself was the one insisting it was real. The difference was that he had actual receipts. He had been watching Cade since age 16 at Montverde Academy. He had seen the emotional makeup before the national hype machine arrived. He had seen the pace, the vision, the command, the leadership before most people had even heard the name. What comes next is where the conversation changes.